What is up? What is up? What is up, ladies and gentlemen? This is Robert Graves bringing you another episode of Year of the Vet. Thank you guys so much for tuning back in. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. If this is not your first time tuning in, man, I appreciate you because you're keeping this moving. And to keep this moving, let's move into some of the business before we get into some of the pleasure. Year of the Vet is on all of the major social media sites that I know of that my age allows me to play around with. So head on over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, LinkedIn. What am I missing? If I'm missing anything, I don't think I'm missing anything. Anyway, head on over to social media sites and like us, follow us, engage with us, tell your friends, write a comment, write a review. I mean, anything you can do to help You're the Vet continue to grow stronger and stronger. And absolutely tell your friends and family, your military friends and family. Tell your friends and family who aren't military and just like podcasts and want to hear some vets talk about some cool shit. So another thing I want to mention is head on over to yearofthevet.com where you can find other conversations for past guests. Please subscribe to Year the Vet on iTunes or whatever other podcast platforms that you're listening to. And please leave a review. It really helps the population that is looking for something to listen to find Year the Vet. So the last item of business is that this is the episode that I announced the first campaign of Year the Vet. If you've listened to the show, you know that I have written a book called How to Grow a Beard, a military transition guide back into civilian life. And that book has turned into Year the Vet. But I have also said that I've given away more books than I've ever sold. And I kind of want to keep that going. So what I've decided to do is give away 500,000 books before Veterans Day of 2020. And how I plan on doing that is if you can go to yearofthevet/donate. That's yearofthevet.com/donate, and you can see right there that currently a few thousand have been donated to veterans, and that you can donate one book, you can donate 100 books, and these books will go to our veteran service organizations that deal with transitioning vets, bases that are dealing with transitioning vets, Operation Gratitude, get the service members that are out in the sandbox right now. But I just want to give the information to individuals that don't have the resources or are struggling to have them and just need kind of the upper hand. And I don't feel like vets should be paying for the information that is in this book because it kind of goes against the whole need, right? If somebody's struggling and they can't pay the money for the book, why am I charging a veteran for the book? That's why I need your help. Again, head on over to yearofthevet.com/donate and you can see the list there and donate from there. All right, business is over. Now for pleasure. Today, I am welcoming Marine Corps veteran, Mr. Timothy Lawson, to the stage, right? Come on up. No, that's stupid. I should leave that in. Tim is the epitome of resilience. I mean, from being diagnosed with cancer at the tender age of 17, that led into joining the Marine Corps and holding one of the most prestigious billets that you can as a Marine security guard. Tim talks about his whole road getting to where he is today, working as the public affairs specialist for the VA, that's the Veterans Administration, as well as being an entrepreneur of his own, creating his own media company, Lawson Entertainment LLC. This man has gone through ups and downs in his life, and he's able to talk about depression and suicide ideation on his own platform, helping not only veterans get out of their own way, but the men and women that he's vowed to protect and serve when he raised his right hand at MEPS. He talks about giving back to the community around you by being of service to those outside of the military. Because realistically, I say it all the time, yeah, we served our country, and once we take off our uniforms, it doesn't mean that we stop serving our country. And that's why You're the Vet is close to me, because yes, it takes a village to build each other up, but we're building each other up to make America actually great again. You know, it's not on one person, it's on the rest of us, and it's not a slogan. It's, you know, it's a lifestyle, because there are people out there who have it in them to help society become better. And Tim is one of those people. Here's where I would tell you all the spoiler alerts of our conversation. However, to me, this was such a phenomenal conversation that I kind of just want you to get lost in it like I did. So with that being said, I introduce Mr. Timothy Lawson. Good to go.
Yep.
You have a phenomenal radio voice, by the way.
Thank you. I actually have to thank the United States Marine Corps for that. I'm sure that it was close before, but I broke my voice twice when I was in boot camp, and so I have this nice, not too deep, you know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to I'm not trying to seduce anybody with it, you know, but it's it's got this nice octave to it. It's great.
Cool beans. So, Tim, I'm glad to be talking to another Marine, especially one that's in the realm of the line I'm walking, somebody who's gone through a lot of the stuff that I can relate to, and I guess a lot of stuff that individuals that listen to the podcast can relate to. So, Tim, thanks for being on the show first and foremost.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. You know, I've been podcasting myself since like 2012 over a number of different shows, and have probably hosted and produced nearly 600 of my own episodes. And you know, it's kind of nice being on this side of the microphone every once in a while.
I bet. And it's funny because one of the notes that I have is that you've been podcasting before the times of Serial. So like, if anybody's listened to podcasts, and they probably know Serial as one of the podcasts that broke podcasts out of the mold. And so the fact that you've been doing it before that means that you're not only a veteran to the Marine Corps, but you're a veteran to the podcasting world. And then we'll actually get more into that and what you're doing with that right now. But let's talk about who pre-Marine Corps Tim is.
Pre-Marine Corps Tim wasn't, I guess still is, but pre-Marine Corps Tim was an only child. I was in a Navy family, but my dad was stationed at the same place for most of my life, and so the couple times that he was stationed elsewhere, my mom and I just stayed where we were up in Whidbey Island, Washington State. So I was in this Navy family that never moves, right, which is so unheard of in the military. Right. 20 years in the Navy, and I lived in the same house the entire time. And, you know, I knew the military could be a thing. I wasn't a great student. I shouldn't say that. I was a bad student. I don't know why I'm trying to like sugarcoat it. Like I wasn't great. No, I was a pretty bad student in high school. And I was into extreme sports. I was into breakdancing. I was into all types of music. And I just was so interested in so many other things. And I just felt like school was just such a waste of time. And I still don't think I was wrong, but I probably should have had a better attitude about it, or had a little bit more ambition.
Who wants to go to school when like there's a cardboard box to break dance on?
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like there were so many different parts of life, you know, and I feel like a lot of teenagers deal with this, which is why I don't like people talking about teenagers who aren't good in school as not being ambitious or not being disciplined. Like I think that most people at that point in their lives have a bunch of things they're interested in. They have things that they want to try. Most students can tame that ambition and manage and still, you know, get through school and realize that there's a career path that they can go on, or that they can explore those things after school, whatever. Then you have, you know, the dimwits like me that decide that, you know, who needs to go to school when I can go to the skate park instead? And, it wasn't about like rebelling, and it wasn't about not going to school. It was about, I had this thing that I'm so passionate about. It's so much more fulfilling to try to ollie off of these 3 stairs than it is for me to sit in a classroom and try to remember something that no adult I know knows. And so is it really that important for me to know it? You know, and so that's where I was in high school. And then I got a kick in the rear and from reality going into my senior year when I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Oh, senior year?
Yeah. So I was 17 years old. It would have been November. Well, I guess it would have been the end of October then, I guess. I found a lump on the side of my neck. It sort of came out from underneath my collarbone because it was big enough to where I would have seen it if it had been more obvious. Mm-hmm. And it sort of kind of came up and was a little more obvious. And I was sort of, I was getting ready for school in the morning, and I was looking in the mirror and I was like, that is so weird. And I showed my mom, and you know, I could see the worry on her face, like, oh, I'm sure it's just a cyst or something. And I had already accepted that it could have been worse. And they did a biopsy. You know, it's funny the things you remember in life. I had I had surgery like 3 days before the movie 8 Mile hit theaters, and I was so excited to see 8 Mile that I was like determined to like recover in time to like go. And like I remember like having a hard time really moving like my shoulder and stuff and my neck because I was still a little stiff from but darn it, I was gonna go see 8 Mile. And yeah, they did the biopsy. I guess by that point I knew it was cancer. I had to be, because I had just gotten out of surgery when they told us it was lymphoma. Shortly after, met with my oncologist, made a plan, and so that was November 2002. May 2003, after a few rounds of chemo and a month of radiation, I was in remission.
That is incredible.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, not only is it incredible. So my background, a little bit about me real quick, is that I just got my master's in sports psychology. So I got my bachelor's in psychology. So the power of the mind and how people think and get through things just draws me in, and I get lost in it. And so one thing that I heard right off the bat is the story of resilience already, right? Like, oh, by the way, when I was 17, I got, lymphomatic cancer. And then you wanted to go see this story about, 8 Mile, if everybody remembers, is like the ultimate story of resilience. But I mean, you didn't know that yet, being that you hadn't seen it. But
yeah,
like,
right.
And then, you get into the Marine Corps from there. But how at 17 did you have that, especially since you didn't move around a lot at all, you stayed in the same house. At that age, where did the power of that resilient mind come from?
Well, I think it really helped that I was, my frontal lobe wasn't even completely developed yet, right? So like self-preservation hasn't even really set in. I'm still this stubborn teenager that thinks his body can do anything,
Gotcha.
right? And so I already wasn't really, I was curious and I was concerned, right? I guess I will say that I wondered if I'd get bad news, right? I was curious to see how bad the news really could have been.
Yeah.
But my oncologist, I was fortunate that Hodgkin's lymphoma has a 95, and it's probably better now. This is back in 2002. They told me that in young males, the success rates on Hodgkin's lymphoma was 95%. And so, at 17 years old, like there couldn't have been a better time for me to get cancer, right?
Yeah.
Like my body was rejuvenating itself at almost at its peak. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not like I walked in, got chemo, ran out, and started like hitting the cardboard again, right? I was the first round of chemo. I took it like a man, as they'd say, not to be generous, but like, that's the saying.
Yeah.
And but so like one round of chemo was 2 visits, and so like and a visit was every other week, and so by like my 4th visit, I was ending the 2nd round. I was a couple months into this. And, like I would leave, like I wouldn't eat right away, like I did after the first couple rounds where like, oh, I'm hungry, let's get some Denny's, and then like trip 4 and 5, I started really like, I'm not really all that hungry.
Yeah.
Got a little bit more difficult for me to wake up the next morning. And not only from like a body and what it can do perspective, but it was the best time of my life to get cancer because like it was my senior year of high school. So like my teachers were empathetic, right? Like my support system couldn't have been more supportive, and it was really easy for them to be supportive, right? Like, plenty of employers I'm sure would be supportive, but it's not easy for them to lose out on an employee for that amount of time. Yeah. Whereas like my school wasn't missing out on me not being around for a few hours the next morning after a chemo session, right? Yeah. They could just be supportive and so I think it was a really good time to go through such a challenge. My friends were really cool about it. Because I was so cool about it, I think they were even more cool about it, right? They just hung out. Like I didn't feel like this overpouring. My friends still gave me shit. They still, like we were still friends, and them, give me a hard time and stuff. So, and I talk about it nonchalantly now because it seems like it was a lifetime ago. You know what I mean? Like that was 16 years ago. Yeah. So much has happened between now and then that I talk about it because I remember it, and it is a time of my past. But when I think about who I was and where I was, it feels like it was a whole other lifetime.
Yeah, I bet. But I mean, you took strength from that and then showed up your dad and joined a better service than he, right? So, like, I mean, how did you go from remission to saying, you know what, like, I'm going to put on a uniform?
Yeah, the military at the time wasn't keen on taking anybody who had a medical past of cancer, right?
Yeah, they won't take you if you're like 30 pounds overweight. Like,
yeah. So look, I'm not gonna recommend that people should do this, but I also don't think it's as big of a deal as some people make it to be. Look, I lied to the military,
of course.
right? I
yeah.
And this is how it went. And, I take ownership of this, but, my recruiter wasn't full of integrity either in this. He knew what the situation was.
Yeah.
So I graduated high school just before my 18th birthday.
Yeah.
I went to boot camp just before my 21st birthday, right? So that's the amount of time that's in between that is in this gap. I was working for a friend of the family's local business. It was fine. It was okay, but there was no, like, it was a family business, right? I wasn't going to get far in it.
Yeah.
And so I knew that I needed a career. And looking back on it, I was not really that responsible of a human being. I can't believe that I felt that inspired to have a career. But I had just finished hanging out with one of my close friends who was a Marine Corps reservist who had just gone back from Iraq. And I was inspired. And so I went and talked to a recruiter. I asked him, I was like, if I put cancer on the medical history, what happens? And he's like, if you tell the Marine Corps you had cancer, you won't become a Marine. Mm-hmm. And that's the way he put it. Now, that is not him telling me to be honest, is it? Right? Like he's saying, if you want to be dishonest, go ahead. And so at 20 years old, I figured, well, this is probably his way of like winking at me and saying, well, you know what to do.
Yeah.
So I was not completely honest with the Marine Corps when I enlisted. I did, though, for the sake of my health, after I'd been in for a couple years, I started marking cancer on my physical forms.
Yeah.
And no one noticed, right? Like, no one picked up on the change. And so, like, people that are in the military aren't keen on recruitment rules, right? So no one knew. It's like it set off an alarm of like, wait, you shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And so after a couple years, I started taking off cancer just so that way, if there was to be like an incident in my blood work or something like that, that at least someone could pick up on that and that could be dealt with. But I'd already been put in remission. I'd already gotten my what they call, short-term follow-up, which is like once every 6 months.
Yeah.
I was to a point where all I needed was blood work once a year to make sure the blood work looked okay. So once I was confident that I wasn't like, screwing over the military on like medical bills.
Yeah.
I was okay with telling doctors that, I do have a history of cancer. So that way when they look at my blood work, they can look at it through that lens.
Well, I mean, I commend, for multiple reasons, I commend you in round of applause and standing ovation, all kinds of stuff, because I enlisted exactly a year before 9/11 happened. And then here you are. I mean, I cannot say, right? I don't have the option of knowing if I would have enlisted once we were in a time of war. I mean, granted, I served till 2010. However, who knows if I would have had that bug in me. But here you are, you've already gone through some shit, to get to this point. And then you still decide to serve your country and knowing that you have the chance to go get shot at. That's incredible. That is the epitome of hero in every aspect of my definition of it. So, one, I know it's cliche, but especially from Marine to Marine, but thank you for your service. And I think that it's an incredible story because I didn't know the full story. I only knew pieces of it. And man, I can't tell you I know more than a handful of people like you that would do that. So,
well,
that's incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If I got to say one more thing on this, just I really got a chance to say this on a public forum. I've told people this, and I've had people like question me, like, "Oh, isn't that kind of unethical?" Yeah, sure. But where I've come to terms with it now is, I've done a lot of work in the veteran space. I've met a lot of veterans of all eras, and I've learned a lot about Vietnam, World War II, Korea veterans. Like World War II veterans, broke all sorts of rules to enlist in the military, right? Like they lied about anything and everything, and like we glorify them, right? Like, oh, how brave of them to lie about age or asthma or this or that to go serve. That's what I was doing, right? Like I wanted to serve my country, and I've come to terms with a moment of not being completely ethical. By realizing, what other great people before me did something similar, and there's something honorable in that. So, that's where I stand on that.
So you join the service, and then you decide that you want to take it a step further and take a B billet of Marine Security Guard. So what was that thought process?
Yeah, I enlisted as a 6672 aviation supply specialist, which is just as exciting as it sounds. And I ordered airplane parts for like 18 months. It was a fine job. I didn't mind it, but I was working with the V-22 Osprey, and I was in New River, in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and they were going to send the Osprey off to combat for the first time.
Yeah.
And MALS 29, which was the squadron, was I was in MALS 26, and MALS 29 was going to bring the Ospreys over there, and I volunteered to go, and they said, we're only taking MALS 29 Marines. And I was pretty upset because I was the only person in my role with the V-22 Osprey on New River. And it's like I dealt with high priority parts, and I was so disappointed. I knew that I wanted to be a Marine Security Guard since I left boot camp, and so as soon as they told me that I wasn't going to deploy, my very next response was, I'm putting in my MSG package, and my gunny was all about it. So she made sure that I had the time and the opportunity to, like when the MSG monitor came to New River, she made sure I got to go. She helped me get my package through, all that sort of stuff, and lo and behold, I became an MSG.
What was your wish list?
My wish list was actually anything but Canada. I literally said that, like, so when you graduate from MSG school, at least they did this when I was there, to tell you where your first post is, they get everybody in the classroom, and then they one by one, they have you stand up, you say where you want to go, and then they give you the reality of where you're actually going.
Yeah. And
I stood up and I was like, anywhere but Canada. Like I legitimately I was ready to go explore. And they told me Algiers, Algeria.
Nice.
And I had no idea where Algeria was, right? I was so ignorant to world geography that as soon as they were done telling everybody, I ran straight to a map to find. I didn't even know a continent to look on first when and so I spent my first year in Algiers. My second post was Moscow, Russia, and then I finished in Lima, Peru.
Holy shit!
Yeah,
those are all like crazy places to have stories from. So
yes,
yeah, I mean that's kind of cool. So not to get too deep into the military life, but at what point from MSG did you decide that you were going to become this media mogul?
Yeah, so I had, man, I have a hard time keeping track of the timeline, but as I was getting ready to leave Peru and get out of the military, I had started a blog on relationships because I had the stupid idea that I knew what I was doing in them.
Was it a live journal?
No, it was just a blog, right?
Is it still out there?
It's not out there, no. Okay. No, does not exist. I'm actually kind of upset that it's not. Unfortunately, and I'll say this now, my biggest regret in all of my content creation is that I didn't let things live when I was done with them.
Yeah.
I had really great work with a lot of podcasts that I did that when the podcast was done, and I was a broke college student still. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to keep forking over the money to keep the feed alive or anything like that. So, that we can talk about that later. So when I got out, I had this little blog that I liked. I would write every once in a while, like, oh, fun dates to go on and stuff like that. And one of my friends asked me, hey, have you ever thought about doing a podcast? And I was vaguely familiar with podcasts because I was listening to some of my favorite radio shows in podcast form. But I wasn't really listening to much else by that point. I think I was listening to like some sports betting podcasts and stuff like that. And then I was like, yeah, that's cool. I'll try it. And so him and I co-hosted this podcast. It was called A Couple Good Ideas. And it was on relationships and just being mindful of your partner and stuff like that. And we had no idea what we were doing, man. I don't even remember. I don't think the software that we use to record our conversations is even available anymore. We hit record and hit end. I think the most editing I did was I think I put music at the front and back but I don't think I edited anything else.
Yeah. Kind of like you would do when you press record and start your message for your cell phone or your pager back in the day.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Tim Lawson. I'm not here right
now. Yeah, and what was great though about it was there wasn't a lot of podcasts out there, right? Like this was back when Adam Carolla was the podcaster of fame, right? Adam Curry was doing his thing. Ira Glass was doing his. Actually, This American Life probably hadn't even like boomed yet.
Yeah.
And so people who listened didn't know what to be critical about because there wasn't much to compare it to.
Yeah.
And then a couple of my friends started a lifestyle brand for veterans called Veteran Empire. And I immediately saw an opportunity there for podcasting. I was like, hey, I should talk to veterans about their post-military life. I proposed it to them. I was like, look, you have a platform. If you're willing to give me the platform and let me use your brand, I'll give you this content. And that was the deal we made. And I mean, it's been a blur ever since then. I did 100 episodes for Veteran Empire. A couple good ideas quickly ceased. I did Tim and Brandon's Bromantic Comedy, which was a comedy show that me and my friend did for a while. Tim and Derek Do What They Want, which was more of like sort of a variety discussion podcast.
Yeah.
One Too Many Veteran Suicide, Fuel for Warriors, Follow Your Spirit, The Better Life. I mean, just I've started and stopped so many podcasts. Some that went on to do 50 plus episodes. Some died before their third episode. But I loved the idea of talking to people. What I loved about being this podcaster, being this content creator was I could go to an event, and if I could find the right connection between someone I wanted to talk to and why they would make a good fit in my podcast, that was a way I could talk to them, right? Like one of the best examples, I had a podcast, and I apologize for just going on a rant here, but I had a podcast called Fuel for Warriors that I was doing, and I was talking to veterans, athletes, and anybody who would resonate with the idea of being a warrior. And I would talk to, and it was a podcast sort of focused on that. I was at a sports event, and Sue Bird was there of WNBA fame, and I went up to her. I was like, "Hey, I have this podcast. I have this podcast. I'd love to have you on." And she was like, "Yeah, just get a hold of the Seattle Storm, and we'll set it up." There's no reason for Sue Bird to ever want to talk to me, right?
Yeah.
But yet I had this fun thing to do when she was about it, right?
Yeah.
And at this point, podcasting is now part of people's press run, right?
Yeah.
Like people make podcast tours and stuff to like promote things. And so that's the one thing I like about where podcasting is. And I'll let you ask your next question so we can back up a little bit, but I get excited about this stuff.
I get it. And it's funny because I get excited about it too. Like so much so that I was like, ask my wife to be a part of a podcast. I'm like, let's do this podcast about movies. But you mentioned that one of the very first outside the relationship podcast, the first podcast you had on the Veteran Network was about veteran transition. And you had yourself a textbook tough transition where you left the service with an idea of what you were going to do with a little money in your pocket. And a year later, you found yourself homeless and unsatisfied with the work that you'd been finding for yourself. So what were you going through during your period of rough transitions? It sounds like you had empathy for that space.
Yeah. So 2011, I get out of the September 2011, I get out of the military. I moved to Sacramento. start podcasting. I move out to DC area summer of 2012 with the intention of going to American University on the GI Bill. I did not get my yellow ribbon certification from them in time, which meant that my GI Bill benefits for that semester were only going to cover that first semester, and that I would have to pay out of pocket if I went to the second semester of that calendar year.
Yeah.
And so I did not go that second semester and started working from home. And that's when I really started ramping up podcasting, right? I was a podcasting fool by that point. I was thinking of a bunch of stuff, and I was doing a bunch of contractor work for a local realtor. And just after that year had ended and I was just about to go back to school, and I finally got on the Yellow Ribbon program and I was finally go back to school full time. Me and my at-time girlfriend broke up, and living in this area is difficult even with a roommate. It's almost impossible to do by yourself.
Yeah.
And by this point, I had gone from having comfortable savings when I got out of the military to not having any at this point. As I try to tell young people, or as I try to tell people that are getting out of the military, finding yourself is fun, but it can be expensive.
Yeah.
If you're not confident or you don't put fail safes for yourself, it can really hit you. And, I got a little too, I was making decisions a little too quickly. And I was a little too uncertain of what I was going to do, what I wanted to do. And so at that point, when her and I finally separated and no longer lived together, I didn't have much money to my name, and I wasn't collecting BAH yet, right?
Yeah.
Because school year hadn't started yet.
Yeah.
And so I was in, like, I was... Yeah, I guess it was, I have I guess maybe my pride has a hard time of calling it homeless, but I was. I was couch surfing, and I was using Airbnb, and I was, taking a few of my friends that were aware of the situation, that knew that I was being as responsible as I could in my situation. Like, if they were going out of town, they would let me stay at their place, right? And we'd call it dog sitting or something like that.
Yeah.
So it was really nice that my friends gave me a hand where they could, but weren't letting me freeload, right? And I wasn't about to ask anybody to let me do that. And so through the graciousness of the people that were in my network, I made it through that bridge of time. And then the school semester starts again, and the BAH is coming in, and I now have money to actually get a place and stuff like that. So, but yeah, it was, and I don't want to talk about actual dollar amounts, but let me tell you, it is kind of the amount of money that was spent in moving and moving again and supporting two people in DC and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why the military tries to harp on people to be prepared when leaving the military, because your month to month and week to week expenses are just so different.
Yeah.
And that's just out of routine life, right? And as soon as you get out of that routine, things become even more unexpected. So after going through all that, I had problems with mental health in the past, but going through all that, I realized, man, this is tough. This transition stuff is tough. I was still tightly wound, like a lot of veterans are when they first get out, and I was still unsure and disappointed and stuff like that. And that's, but to be honest, that's really when I hit my stride as a content creator, because I started the One Too Many Veteran Suicide Project, which is probably the project in the podcast that I get the most credit for.
Yeah.
Now.
And so, I mean, there's a couple of things that I want to pull from that, just to lead into One Too Many. That podcast normalizes the taboo of suicide. And so you use your own story to initiate that conversation. So, I don't want to take away light from that. But before we even get into that, because you mentioned that's why the military harps on being prepared. Do you feel that you were properly prepared to exit the military?
Yes and no. So I think that certain individuals definitely helped me be prepared. I remember when I was in Moscow, just before I left Moscow, my first sergeant literally sat on the floor with me in our response room talking to me about what I was going to do after the military and talking about college. And, he explained to me education benefits, how they work, and how to not undervalue what I'm worth to a university. Mm-hmm. And without that conversation, I may not have considered applying to American University, which is a pretty prestigious university in this area and around the States. Yeah. And, I know a lot of friends that would get out and they're like, yeah, I'm probably going to go to my local community college. And they're like, no, you're worth a lot of money to these universities, right? Take advantage of that. Yeah. And go somewhere that the GI Bill can cover with the Yellow Ribbon program and go make yourself valuable. And it was little conversations like that that helped me get prepared. The Marine Corps as an organization, no. I remember sitting in in TAPS, right? The Transition Assistance Program. And they're talking to the lowest common denominator, right? They're talking to the least prepared people. And it didn't, as someone who was, medium prepared, that was decently prepared, there was still a long ways between where I was and being fully prepared. Yeah. But that gap wasn't being filled because they were talking to the people before. I remember, I don't know why this is what stands out, but I remember they were talking about job interviews, and they're like, and remember, if you have a Skype interview, remember it's important to wear pants, because if you stand up during your Skype interview, you don't want to get caught not wearing pants. And I remember thinking, thanks, man. Can we get to how to actually have the conversation with the person and possibly get the job and not embarrassing ourselves with pants? And so. In that way, no, I don't think that I was well prepared because I went into a lot of their programs more prepared than the other people around me. Yeah. And the other people who was being spoken to, and I was just sort of left there to figure out the rest on my own. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's good to know that. I hope you're wearing pants right now.
I am definitely wearing pants, but I don't want to give all the podcasting secrets away. But for those of you listening, if you listen to a podcast, there's a good chance that one of your podcasters has recorded not wearing pants before. So
I'm not wearing pants. Anyway,
yeah, I've definitely recorded not wearing pants before, though. That's definitely happened. Yeah.
So yeah. So thanks for that. Because, that does come up a lot. And, it is one of those conversation pieces that vets get into. Oh, I wasn't prepared. And I get that. And I actually don't think that there's any amount of preparation you can do that can prepare you. But what I do hear from a lot of vets that I have the conversation with is that, one of the questions comes up, when should you start the process of transitioning? And almost, I'd say a solid 80% of them say, from the day you enlist, the day you get in. And I mean, that's something that has to change from the beginning. And that's a conversation that has to start with, Yeah. So, I mean, not to get too deep into that, but.
No, there's plenty to say about that because this goes for every stage of your life, right? Absolutely. When do you prepare for no longer being in that stage of life? Well, I started, I was paying off debt and saving up money from the beginning of my enlistment, but I wasn't thinking financially. I hadn't made the financial adjustments for getting out until I realized that I was going to get out. Exactly, right. Yeah. And so whereas that change of mindset should have come years before and not just what, I'm not going to re-enlist. Now let me change the way that I look in the way I save money, the way that I invest and stuff like that. Yeah. And so it was little things like that, that are definitely on my own accord. But when you think about how young and inexperienced a lot of us are, I felt like I was getting just enough to know that I should be doing something differently, but never getting enough to know what that was. Yeah. And in 2011, there wasn't a dozen veteran service organizations and blogs and podcasts and all this sort of stuff that continuously talked about transitioning and preparing and stuff like that. So, I mean, I really was going to like government websites looking for, programs that existed, or looking for any bit of, trying to talk to people that had been through before. Like it's amazing to think the internet was just as prominent, but the content and the information is the amount that's there now is vastly different to what it was back then.
Yeah, night and day. What I want to talk about, right, because there's not a lot of people who are so open and willing to talk about depression and the dark side of transition and the dark side of just life in general, right? So, like I said, one too many started with your own internal battle with suicide. What are some of the thoughts that you had that people listening might be having that they need to address? Because some of those thoughts that we just pass off, that's just stupid. I'm being dumb, or I got to stop thinking like this because it's a sign of weakness or whatnot. So what were you experiencing in your moments of just need, right? Need and want and fear.
Yeah. So anybody who's dealt with mental health issues and depression especially can probably resonate with this, in that I actually know more about the needs of someone who's depressed on the more normal or average bouts of depression than maybe my moments of the bigger crisis. And it's I guess it's because I'm a little bit more aware of what's going on, and I can actually like think about it. In those, going to my suicide attempt, it was really just a moment of like just complete panic that I just did not emotionally have control over. And I was in a panicked mode, and I went for my mother's medicine cabinet and threw down the bottle of pills that I first grabbed out of the. They could have been anything. I didn't even look at the label, right? They could have been like allergy medicines. I didn't know. I just threw it, swallowed them all, and fortunately woke up the next day. And and when we talk about mental health and people who have suicidal ideations, we look at their suicide attempts in life as like the pinnacle of their time and need. And sure, like, right, because that's when you're getting closest to death or closest to possibly following through with those motives. But I've experienced all sorts of different situations when it comes to depression and how I feel, what sparks it. I have a therapist that I talk to when I think about this stuff, and I've realized that a lot of depression and a lot of mental health issues is just practice. You feel a certain way, and you feel like certain ways would be better, and those ways are often like, a lot of it is inspired from this desperate need to escape the current reality or the current feeling you're having. Mm-hmm. And when you're locked inside your own head, a lot of that times death is what comes, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And I'd never try to act like I know how the mind works, because it's a really complicated thing. But, a recent realization that I had, that my toughest moment in depression is convincing myself that this time that it's going to be okay, that this time isn't different from the other times.
Would you say that, were you addicted to a feeling, or were you addicted to kind of connecting the dots, right? Because back to that resilient 17-year-old, like, did you have a thought or a feeling like, look, I've been through worse, I can get over this, and it just kept piling on and you just kept taking it until it broke you?
I mean, that's the thing, is I would argue that the day that this is pretty, I'm actually having an epiphany right now. No kidding. The day that I attempted suicide is not the closest that I have mentally gotten to wanting to die. Mm. if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah, it does.
The moment of panic that I had, if on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is completely mentally prepared to die, like there's nothing, all you want is it for it to happen. The day that I attempted, I probably was only around like a 6 or a 7, right? And it was panic and complete just emotional, just having complete lack of control of my emotions, and not being able to reason with myself. That's what made it jump and got me to the attempt. But, mentally and emotionally, I've definitely been in the 8 or 9 range of that scale before, without ever touching a means of which to kill myself. So when I never really think about the biggest. I never, when people talk about, that moment of, tell us about that moment. I actually don't know much about it, or if there's really anything to take away from it other than it's important for me now to know how to control when I'm in the 4, 5, 6 range. And by control, I mean recognizing where I am emotionally and taking care of that immediately, right? Yeah. And I've reached a point now where I notice I'm in a depression and I try not to dwell on it. I'm not great at that. I think that's one of the bigger challenges. But I know what to start. Like, I know, okay, I need exercise. I need to get out. I need good conversation with my wife. Yeah. I need to play with my dog. I need to not work. I need to just do something that I find fun, like play a video game or something like that. Yeah. And all of those may not work this time, but one of them might. And I know that one of those things has worked in the past. Sometimes all you need is time to pass. And so the more you can fill that time with things that make you feel good about yourself, either one of those things will help you move on from that state of depression, or at the very least, it'll help you help the time to pass, and you'll be on the other side of that feeling. So going back and clarifying on the thing I've had the most trouble with is, when I am depressed or I'm having a mental health crisis because I am unsure about something that's about to happen, I can't convince myself that this time it's going to be okay. Yeah. And I guess what I mean by that is, I'm trying to think of an example that isn't an actual personal example. This is a decent example. Like, something happens at work and you're not sure what it's going to mean for your career or even your current employment, right? And so, something happened, like you make a big mistake on a Friday afternoon, and that you're not going to know what the consequences of that are until Monday morning. And you enter a state of anxiety, depression, anger, concern, like you can put all the words on it. It's a lot of it looks the same. I could put if I'm in one of those states and I put myself through all of those means of trying to bring myself back to normal, put myself back in a state of rationale and reason, the thing that still bars me from truly getting there is convincing myself that this time it's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. I can never get myself to be convinced that this time isn't going to be when it all falls down.
Yeah. I do want to ask, and by all means, say pass if you need to.
Go ahead.
Would you say that your trigger is not knowing that you'll be 100% in control of the situation that is about to come up?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a trigger, but it's definitely the barrier. Yeah. Right. It's definitely what keeps me from being okay. Yeah. And I was just explaining this to my wife the other day, and I don't know why she knows this. I was talking to her about it. Right. She knows this about me. I consider myself a pretty creative problem solver. Right. And this is such a silly example, but I think it makes sense to people who just get frustrated in everyday life. And sometimes the frustration just piles on. I was at a grocery store and my credit card wouldn't work. And then I called my bank. They said the credit card was fine. I'm like, okay, great. I go back to try to pay for my groceries. Still not working. the grocery store is saying the bank is denying it. The bank is saying the merchant isn't accepting it. And I'm like, oh, okay, it's no one's fault. Great. And in this moment, I don't have any cash or like another card on me. So I'm trying to so I'm like, oh, do you take Apple Pay? And they're like, yeah, we do. Great. After trying like 3 different terminals, they couldn't get the Apple Pay to work. And I'm reaching this boiling point. And the boiling point is not anger, right? I'm not angry at anybody or really at anything. I'm starting to become anxious and upset because what I feel was something I'm so confident in being able to do, and that's problem solve or find workarounds and making things happen the way I need them to. After the 3rd terminal wouldn't take the Apple Pay payment, I just told the lady, I was like, can you just void the transaction, and I'm just going to go home. Like this is starting to impact me in bad ways. Like I just need to go. Yeah. And she totally got. She was like, you're good. Go ahead. Don't even worry about it. Yeah. And I just walked out. I went home. And I told my wife, what happened, and it's such a silly thing, right? Not being able to pay for groceries, but going to that not being in control thing. It wasn't that I wasn't in control, but I wasn't able to solve this problem.
Gotcha.
And when you take that example and you apply it to bigger and more, things like the employment thing, that's when not only do I know how to solve this problem, but what ends up happening is completely out of my control and the negative consequences are pretty heavy.
Yeah. In my field, we preach controlling the controllables all the time, right? If it's out of your control, what is in your control? And that, knowing that phrase, control the controllables, helps so many people get out of their own way. But it's hard. It's hard to not experience that frustration or the anxiety that comes up with that. But again, getting back to that thought, it's like, okay, what can I control? I can control my breathing, right? Like you walked out of the store, you can control the process of not letting yourself get more riled up or angry or disappointed, whatever verb you want to put in there. So yeah. Anyway, thanks for sharing, because one thing that I do want to start getting into the weeds with is the feeling of X, right? And I want people to, instead of just talking about it, I want people to be able to relate, like, oh, that's what I'm experiencing. That right there, what he just said, that's what I'm experiencing. And then hearing that you're going to your own therapist, oh, well, maybe I should see a therapist as well. So, are you seeing a therapist through the VA?
No, I'm not. So I'm actually seeing my therapist is through an app called Talkspace. Yeah, it's a little bit more in my speed in that I want to talk about something when I want to talk about something. Yeah. I don't want to wait for an appointment. I don't want to go, like my therapist, I may not say something all week. I may say something 4 times a week, right? And what I like about it is, instead of trying to remember what we talked about last, I literally have this message history that I can refer back to, right? So when she asks a follow-up question, I can actually go through the messages that we've been sending each other and see what exactly she's following up on. And I can see oh, okay, I remember I expressed this last week. That's what she's referring to.
Yeah.
And so it's, to each their own, but I've really enjoyed it. And yeah, I do a virtual version of therapy, and it works for me.
Well, I think that it works for, we're getting to that point with everything now, right? The age of immediacy. Yeah, I'll definitely put it in the show notes for people.
Yeah, I would say I wish there was, and I'm sure if upgraded and paid more or something like that, I could get this, but I do wish there was a routine face-to-face, even if it was FaceTime or through the app or something like that. Even just once a month of just we have this normal time where we actually look at each other sort of face-to-face and talk. It would humanize it a little bit more. But it's what I really like about it is, and this is why anybody should get therapy. One, I got therapy when I wasn't depressed, right? I was in a good place when I started therapy. And I did that because I knew it was important that if I got into a bad place, that I'd already have this system built in.
Yeah.
We hear about this my friend is going through this and they're refusing to get help. Well, how many times have we heard that, right? Mm-hmm. And the answer to that is to start getting help sooner, to start getting help before they need help. And so I knew that was important, so that's why I went through therapy when I was in a good place, and lo and behold, it's helped. I've gotten into some bad places, and one thing it's really helped with is I'm willing to talk to my wife about anything, right? She's my best friend. I talk to her. She knows so much about me. I tell her like, hey, just so you know, I'm depressed, and she usually responds with, I know. Like she's fully aware of what's going on, but I don't always know how to put how I'm feeling into words, or haven't processed some things. And so talking to my therapist about it first helps me understand how I feel. And then I can put those words better, or I can put those feelings better into words to when I talk to my wife about it. Yeah. And that makes those conversations easier.
That's cool. I mean, I could literally talk about this all day long. Because, again,
me too.
Like I prepped it with, I'm infatuated with how people think, and then like their solutions to their thoughts, so I can go on and on, but I do want to honor your time, and because I want to get into what you're doing now. And you're doing a few things. You have your own media company currently, still Lawson Entertainment, correct?
Lawson Entertainment, that's right.
And you have 8 podcasts with your media company, but you're also the public affairs specialist for the VA. So I'm interested in both of them. How do you land that role with the VA? One, and then I want to talk about the entrepreneurship, the road to entrepreneurship, and if you can share some of the lessons learned to not do, right? So
very well.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So let me tell you one thing about entrepreneurship. I'll start there, since there's some really quick points on that. No entrepreneur really knows what they're doing. One of my friends, Fred Wellman, who is an Army veteran and is the founder and CEO of Scout Comms, their clients include USAA, Student Veterans of America, GoRuck, a number of like big companies that you've probably heard of. He still tells me, he's like, I'm still like, there's still things that we're trying to figure out. And it's one big learning process, but it's being an entrepreneur means you have to be willing to learn.
Yeah.
One of my biggest pieces of advice that I could give to people, so long as you have the resources to do this, and one of the biggest resources obviously is time, but with everything that your company does, with everything that your professional endeavor does, even if you're a one person, like, learn how to do something that needs to be done, understand it the best that you can, and then outsource it if you can. But learn what it means to do that thing before you outsource it, because one, you're going to be able to hire better, and two, you're going to be able to monitor the success of that better.
Okay.
And so, like, accounting's a great example. No one wants to account, right, for their own business, right? That's the one part, like, that's the part that I had the biggest trouble with. But I'm currently trying to make sure that before I outsource it to somebody, that I understand what it takes and what all that entails.
Yeah.
And so that's one big lesson. Be as frugal as possible in your business. Free is best, or actually not needing something is best. And then if you need something, try to get it free. And then if you can't get it free, try to get it used and super cheap, right? And go up that ladder.
Yeah.
Mark Rockefeller, who's an Air Force veteran and the founder of Street Shares, told me, he was like, entrepreneurs give up a 40-hour work week so they can do an 80-hour work week, right? And it's so true. They want to get rid of the 9-to-5 grind and then end up taking on something that fills up every bit of their life.
Yeah.
And I've heard so many opinions on the spectrum of work-life balance, but I've learned that your days should start with your priority and work from there.
Yeah. And
work-life balance doesn't mean that balance is even all the time, right? I think that's the biggest misconception with work-life balance, is people think that it's constantly even.
Yeah.
It's not. It means that over the long term, when you're flipping your coin, you're getting heads just as many times as you're getting tails, right? And that means that the amount of hours that you're putting in work is being balanced eventually by life, and vice versa. And so if you put in 100-hour work week to get something done because it's important, the next week block off 3 days where you spend maybe 3 hours work following up on that project, and the rest of the time enjoying your family, doing something recreationally, whatever it may be. And then vice versa. If you go on a nice long holiday, don't think much about work, come back and hit the ground running and put your time into some work. The thing with VA, I got extremely lucky. The great philosopher Seneca said, what did he say? Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. I'd spent 4 years podcasting, creating content. I was learning how to do video. I was learning every bit of multimedia that I could, and I was becoming really good at one thing, which was podcasting, and I was trying to become pretty good at other things, which was like writing, social media, video, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I ended up running into a guy at the Student Veterans of America National Conference, a guy that I'd known for a couple of years. He worked at VA in the position that I have right now. And I was like, hey, man, I'm looking for a digital content position. If you know of anybody who's hiring, let me know. A couple weeks later, he contacts me and he's like, hey, I'm leaving my position and I've recommended you as my replacement. Or at least he said, I've recommended you to my director.
Yeah.
And fortunately, the United States government in every department can do this. And I don't know how often it's exercised, but they exercise it this time. They can do what's called a veteran recruitment, which means if you're a veteran and a office wants you badly enough, so long as you are fully qualified for the position, right? So you already have to clearly be a cut above the rest. But they can recruit you with no competition.
Yeah.
And it's one of the it's something the government started doing, I think it started like 5-7 years ago is when it got popular, when like veteran unemployment was a big deal.
Yeah.
And it made it really easy for, because bureaucracy prevails in the government. Yes. And this was one way to circumvent that was,
yes.
Here's a veteran. He's clearly good at what we need him to do. We're just going to take him.
Yeah.
And that's how I got the job I have now. It wasn't 2 months after I started my position, and my director messaged me and she's like, all right, it's time for a podcast. And that's when I started VA's podcast. It's fun. It resembles a couple of other podcasts that I've done in the veteran community, but it honors service a little bit more than my other ones had. But one thing that I really like about it is we talk about the cool things that veterans are doing post-military. And I think that as you're showing with your efforts at Year of the Vet, that the service is cool, a lot of great stories. It's all honorable and the stories need to be shared. But what's so cool about it all is what veterans are doing post-military and the impact they're having in their industries and their communities.
Yeah, 1,000%, yes. So I do have a couple of quick hitters before we wrap it up.
Go ahead.
One of the first things is, what would you tell vets who are struggling to find themselves today?
Yeah. Oh man. Struggling to find themselves today. Read The Alchemists. That's a good book, and it kind of. Yeah, read The Alchemist, and let your own interpretation be what answers that question. Talk to the people that know you, mm-hmm. right? And take every praise and criticism you get for face value. And what I mean by that is, if someone says, "Hey, you're really good at this," don't undersell yourself on how good you are, how good you may be on that, mm-hmm. right? Take it as okay, I'm good at this. When someone says that's not your thing, take their word for it, right?
Yeah.
And only from people that know you, right? I'm not saying don't let the YouTube commenters influence how you feel, but let that sort of shape a little bit of who you are. Try things. Just try things. And the lower the barrier to entry to trying that thing, the more more effort you should put into trying it. I'm in my third year of covering the local professional women's soccer team mm-hmm. because I wanted to get into sports. I wanted to try sports journalism, not get into it. I wanted to try it. Women's soccer was big enough for there to be a customer base, but small enough to where it wasn't difficult for me to get media credentials to the game and stuff.
Yeah.
So I tried it, and I liked it, and I still do it. Yeah. There's plenty of other examples where same scenario. I tried it. Not my thing. Don't do it.
Yeah.
And the more you do that, the more you figure out who you are.
What is some of the best advice for transitioning service members?
Money. No, I'm dead.
No,
I mean, like, look,
1,000% yes.
People say so many things about money that are so like, money can't buy you happiness, and then you have other people saying like money makes life. You have so many conflicting like fun little sayings that make you feel better about where you may be in life.
Yeah.
The truth is, look, I'm fully employed. I get paid a decent amount of money from the United States government to do what I do, and let me tell you, life is just better. And life is better because I don't have to worry about that stupid thing of money.
Yeah.
And so the closer you are to that feeling, the more adventurous you get to be in that last thing I said of try things.
Yeah.
And the more financial, and it's not just about being financially responsible. It's about knowing where and when to invest in yourself, right? Yeah. So like, it's about, is it worth spending a few $100s to take a course on something that you're interested in? Maybe it is, right? Yeah. But it's just it's really evaluating if that's the right place to spend your money, what the where it may be. But money's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. If you could tell recruit Lawson one thing to prep for today, what would that be?
Money. No, you know what? So something I don't really talk to people about this, but when I was sitting down with my recruiter and he was asking me like, what do you want to do in the military? What do you want to do in the Marine Corps? I didn't know what public affairs was called.
Yeah.
I didn't know, but I didn't know what diplomacy was called. I didn't know I didn't know the names for any of these things.
Yeah.
And so but I knew I had an interest in something like that. And so I told him, I was like, like maybe something like communications. And he was like, oh, like radio? And I was like, no. And he was like, well, we got radio operators. And I'm like, no, that's not quite it. And because I didn't know what public affairs was. I didn't know what that industry was like. I didn't know, what a number of, the communications fields really were. Yeah. I didn't know how to better explain myself. Had I had a better understanding of what those jobs were, I may have actually taken a completely different career path.
Yeah.
And so something that I always tell high schoolers that are looking in the military is understand the job you're getting into, understand what jobs that are available, understand how those jobs differ from branch to branch, and make your decision based off that. Other than military specific, I would tell him to not always go home for leave.
Yeah. That's one I tell people getting in all the time now. I'm like, man, if I could do it all over again, it's space age travel. Like, what am I going to LA for? I've been there. So, what is your end goal, or like, what does your legacy look like?
What does my legacy look like?
Yeah.
Ooh, I'm about to hit a big evolution, I think, in my contributions to mental health and suicide prevention. I'm going to continue plugging in veteran specific stuff where I can, but I'm going to possibly take on a bigger endeavor of making it of not just focusing on veterans, because I've reached a point where the things that I know and understand about mental health and suicide prevention in myself aren't connected to my service, right?
Correct.
And so that means that while I can empathize a lot with veterans, I still have a lot to contribute to just the conversation as a whole.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of doing a disservice by only branding it with military and veteran and stuff like that. And so I want to have a stronger contribution to that. And I think that I want my kids to know or to feel like their father had an impact either on a community or an industry or even just a small group of people when it comes to suicide and mental health, and helped a lot of other conversations happen because of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I get that 1,000%. So, man, you're doing some great stuff. Thank you for taking the time out for having this conversation. I know it's hard to get guys who are go-getters to stop for an hour. So, are there any topics that we didn't touch that you might want to just address or any kind of plugs you want to put in right now?
Yeah, I mean, if anybody's interested in what we just got done talking about, one2manyproject.com. It's ONE, the number 2 manyproject.com, is the website where all of that content lives. Something that takes all veterans a long time, or what seems to be a long time. Every veteran takes some time to get to this point of realizing that their military service doesn't need to be the pinnacle of their life, that It doesn't need to be the coolest or the best or the toughest or whatever may be thing in their life. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it doesn't have to be that, right? I think a lot of veterans get out and have a hard time believing or accepting that maybe something else could be better, tougher, more rewarding. And, you know, one thing that I've had a difficult time with is when people thank me for my service when they know that I'm doing other things and don't really make mention of those other things. I kind of want to be like, are you really paying attention to what I'm doing right now?
Yeah.
Like, I get that, you know, I served in the military and there were sacrifices that were to be made, but you should see what I'm doing now, right? Like, the things I'm doing now are just as worthy. Not that I feel like people need to thank me for it, but if you're going to thank me for my contributions to our nation and our world and our society, the other things I'm doing are just as worthy of praise. And I feel like it's almost undermining those efforts if we just continuously go back to these 5 years that I spent in uniform.
Yeah. However, you know, Marines lead the way, and you know, so it's kind of, you're serving the nation still by serving the people who live inside of it. So, you know, you can look at it that way.
That's fair.
Reframe it. So, but yeah, you know, thank you for your contributions. I'll say it first.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you for providing this platform for other veterans to speak on.
Yeah. Timothy, anytime you need a platform to speak on and get off the other side of the mic, man, I'm here for you. And tap into me, let me know. Hopefully one day we get the opportunity to shake hands and introduce ourselves face to face. So
awesome. I dig it.
Yeah. With that being said, for those of you that stayed tuned to this whole conversation, thank you. And please, if you guys want to reach out to Timothy Lawson, I will have all of his contact information in the show notes along with what we've talked about, so you can just tap right back into those areas. And Timothy, thanks again. And I highly suggest you guys look into some of these projects that Tim's worked on. So remember that you are heroes, live like one. I want to thank you for listening to another episode of You're the Vet, and please, again, share this with your friends, share this with your family, share this with other veterans, and share this with anybody who is interested in podcasts and just wants to hear good stories. Please go to the social media sites of You're the Vet and like and follow them. Engage with the community, engage with me. Make sure you head on over to you'rethevet.com to check out other episodes from other amazing veterans out there doing amazing things. And when that pop-up comes up, put your email in there and subscribe to the email list so that I can keep you updated with new conversations with new guests, as well as things that's going on in the community. So last but not least, please head on over to iTunes or whatever you're listening to You're the Vet on, and please write a review. Again, thank you for tuning in once again, and remember, you are a hero. Live like one.